Lily.
And I'm Sophie.
And welcome to the Keeping Tabs podcast, hosted by the Princeton Public Library's Teen Advisory Board.
We interview authors to learn more about the writing process.
Today we are here with Kristen Simmons, the critically acclaimed author of the young adult dystopian Article 5 series, the young adult thriller Vale Hall series, and 3 young adult speculative fiction novels, Pacifica, Metaltown, and The Glass Arrow. She is also the co-author of the young adult fantasy series Set Fire to the Gods. Kristen Simmons' upcoming release, Find Him Where You Left Him Dead, is going to be the start of a yōkai horror duology and is set to be released on October 10th, 2023. Hello, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
We are glad to have you.
You've written books from many different genres, including dystopia, thriller, and speculative fiction. How have you been able to find the perfect art of writing from so many different genres? Are there similarities in your writing experiences between?
So I don't necessarily set out trying to write in a specific genre when I write a book. I always say the story comes first. So whatever story comes into my mind, whatever characters come into my mind, and the world that builds around it, that is how I formulate the story. I don't necessarily think about genre when I'm putting something together. But that said, someone once told me that people write the same story over and over. It just looks different. And I think that I definitely do that. So I think I definitely write a survivor story. I think I have from the very beginning. And sometimes that appears to be a dystopian survivor story. And sometimes that ends up with a girl who is living at a school for con artists. It just sort of depends on what is happening around them. But the thread of survival is always really strong in my books.
My mind is blown because I didn't think of it that way. And now that you've said that, I'm making all these connections in my head. I'm like, that is definitely very true for your books.
Yeah, I think a lot of authors do that. If you look at the actual threads that lie under all of the stuff on top, I think you'll see a very similar story that occurs over and over in slightly different ways. So one story may have fairies, one story may have, serial killers, but it all sort of contains the same base in it. And I feel like that base is who we are as an author and the message we're trying to tell.
That is very well put. I love that. I'm going to go through all the books I have by different authors now and just look at it.
Put them all together. Yeah.
Yes. Also, I love the vibrant cast of characters in your Vale Hall series. So how do you craft a cast of characters in a way that makes them feel like they're real people and readers really connect with them?
Oh, I love, thank you so much for saying that. I so love the cast of characters in Vale Hall. I think bottom line, it came down to who do I love and who do I want to hang out with? And I think, they always say art mirrors life, and I wanted a group of kids that reflected the kind of people that I want to be around, that I am around, in terms of everything from diversity of skin tone to diversity of ideas and strength, and they all bring different strengths to the table, and different kinds of humor to the table, and different kinds of sass to the table. And that's the kind of people that I surround myself with in my life now, and the kinds of people I always want to surround myself with. And that's what I wanted for Bryn in that story, is I wanted her to be able to say, I have found this family. Like, I have found my people, and it looks like this.
I love that. That was definitely well conveyed in the story because they feel like they're my friends too. I see them so vividly in my mind, and yeah. I love every single one of them.
Oh, good. And that was one of my biggest things, is I wanted to create a scenario where somebody said, I want to have my birthday party with these people. Like, I want to be able to have birthday cake in the basement with this group right here. Like, yes. And if it was not that, then it wasn't the group that I was trying to build. Yes.
That you excellently did that, because I'm sad that I can't have birthday cake with them. Like, I'm like, please be real.
I am too.
Oh my gosh. And not only are your characters amazing, but your plots are also incredibly compelling. Every single chapter of your books moves the plot forward to the point where I can't put your books down because I have to know what happens. So, how do you pace your plots in such an exciting way without having your stories feel rushed?
Oh, thank you for saying that. So a lot of that actually happens in edits. I will say the Deceiver's original draft was a lot longer, and my editor and I worked a lot on condensing it and tightening it up to that point where it did feel like a thriller, that it had that boom, boom, boom kind of pushing forward of the pacing, and never letting you get too relaxed, never letting the reader lose focus. It has to be kind of that constant push, push, push. And so that was something we did work on in edits. Quite a bit, because my first drafts are generally longer. Um, so yeah, tightening kind of comes over time. But also, once I had that first draft down, I knew what I wanted to say in books 2 and books 3, and they just kind of wrote themselves. Like, they just kind of spilled out piece by piece of how to finish putting that puzzle together. Because there's a lot of twists. There's a lot of twists in books 2. There's twists in books 1, but books 2 and books 3 are like twist, 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 just tons of pieces coming into play.
Yes, I was losing it reading the second book of the series. I couldn't stop reading.
Oh, good.
Did you know exactly what was going to happen in each book when you started the series, or did that just kind of fall into place naturally?
So I would say I knew about 75% of what was going to happen. And then there was 25% that totally surprised me and came out organically while I was writing, which is always fun. And sometimes very annoying because you have to go back and shift everything to make sure it lines up. But yeah, I think I knew quite a bit, and then yeah, it was a matter of figuring out how that lays out as you go through. The plot progresses obviously in book 2 and book 3. You have you know different things that the characters have to do to accomplish new goals that come up, but also the story at the base of it, the story that they all knew, the history that they all thought they knew, that is actually the same for books 1, 2, and 3. But I unfold a new layer of it in every book. So what they thought they knew in book 1, they don't know in book 2. Then they think they figure it out, but then by the time you get to 3, they have to peel back another layer and realize they didn't know what they thought they knew. They had to learn something else. So it's that onion, right? The layers of the onion are constantly unpeeling in the series.
For sure. And you've already touched on this a little bit with your answer, but is there anything else you want to say about when you write a series, you have a really intricate way of raising the stakes as the readers progress in the book? How do you keep the momentum that you built in the first book as to avoid, a mid-series lag?
Yeah, that can be really hard. But I think it does go back to that, like, what you thought you knew concept, right? Like, if you constantly are changing what you thought you knew, then it leaves that reader in that space of being uncomfortable. And that's what you want as a writer, is you want your readers to not feel too comfortable. Obviously, when you read books, you want to like feel a certain way about them. But I think that discomfort is something more people want than care to admit. And when you're writing something like a thriller, especially, you need that discomfort to push the narrative forward. And so that was kind of my goal throughout, especially books 2 and books 3, was creating situations which made people uncomfortable, through making my characters uncomfortable, through making Bryn and her friends uncomfortable. Sorry, guys.
Don't apologize. I loved being uncomfortable. I guess you're apologizing to the characters. Maybe they do deserve an apology. But yes, that is so well put, talking about like kind of taking the status quo that they thought they knew and keeping it the same, but just peeling back the layers. That's what makes your books and your series so like cohesive, and so the reading experience is just so great for those.
Good, thank you.
Oh, yeah. And many of your stories, including the Vale Hall series and Pacifica, are influenced by historical events or mythology. So, how do you know that you want to write a book inspired by a historical event or a time period or a myth? And then, how do you go about making it your own?
Yeah. So I think I probably share this in common with most readers is I love stories and I love um the old stories, the folk tales and where stories come from. And those old stories, folk tales, myths, things like that, those have always stuck with me. And I always um have thought, wouldn't it be cool to explain some of these things in a modern way that would be so much more approachable for people now than trying to explain, like, Vikings, yes, are awesome, and Valhalla is an awesome concept, and talking about Valkyries riding in on mythical horses, and giant wolves that eat gods. That's all super cool. But how does this play through in our actual lives? Like, what could this story look like if it was happening right now today? And so I don't think it's as much as of me trying to say, like, how do I incorporate this myth into real life, as me trying to say, wouldn't it be cool if this myth were happening now? If it were, this is how it would play out. And so I think about that in terms of the Vale Hall series, which is based on the Norse myth of Valhalla, where Odin is the god of gods and brings in his or sends out his Valkyries to collect the souls of fallen soldiers and bring them back to Valhalla to prepare for Ragnarok at the end of the world. But of course, in this story, Odin is the director of a private school and he's sending out his students to collect blackmail secrets so he can have his own kind of Ragnarok. He can, bring justice to the city and the politicians who are creating corrupt situations. So that to me was the modern retelling of it. And now, I'm looking at, or I'm not looking at, I'm writing this Japanese horror based on Japanese mythology, and it all goes back to, like, how do I tell my son about Japanese mythology in a way that he can understand? It becomes like using concepts that are available to us now. Modern retellings are just trying to make sense of old stories right now.
Personally,
That was very
I'm
rambling. I'm sorry.
No, it's a
Great.
podcast. You're supposed to ramble.
Yeah, that's
Go
what we
on.
want. I'm a sucker for retellings. I always have been, and I have since I was little. Like, I have such like fond memories of reading. Like, I don't want to use Percy Jackson because that's such a cliche example, but I'm going to use Percy Jackson because I think it puts it in a term, like when you said you want your son to understand these stories.
Yeah.
Fourth grade me was able to understand these stories that I study in school now because of a series that was made accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that's so valuable, especially as you're growing up, because then you get access to different cultures and stories, and the way the books we read are derived from stories from forever and ever and ever ago. And I think it's such a fascinating way that all these stories fit together, which ties back to your initial point. You've all your books are a little bit similar with the same point and the same thought. All of these stories connect.
Yeah.
Every story we hear seems to connect, which I think is the best thing about a retelling, is because everything is connected.
Yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
we also love Percy Jackson in this house. I will say that if you can hear the booming that sounds like thunder, it's actually our dog. Well, we have 3 dogs, but one is a Great Dane rescue, and his name is Percy Jackson, and he's running around on the floor above my head, so it sounds like thunder. But yeah,
That's awesome.
we love some Percy Jackson in this house too.
I
Glad
saw
to
your
hear.
dog on Instagram. I was watching your Instagram while you fostered to adopted him. I'm so jealous. Percy is adorable. Oh my gosh.
Yes, thank you. He is a big nerd. He is just like a dog that thinks he is so much smaller than he is, and he is not small. He is not a small dog.
It's okay. My dog's 80 pounds and thinks he's a lap dog. So I feel your pain.
Love it. Love it.
So moving forward, all of your books have a really elaborately created setting. How do you create such an atmospheric place for your readers to go?
Oh, that's nice. Well, I will say the set fire duology, that was really an interesting experience and a fun experience. I co-wrote that with Sarah Rash, and she um, we kind of took the roles of, I was the character person, she was the world building person, and I learned so much from her during that process on world building. Um, and yeah, I love creating settings that feel real, and sometimes those are the most fantasy settings that you can come up with, right? but but you have to create that thread in there that can make the reader feel like they're actually living in that space. And in order to do that, I, as the writer, have to feel like I can be in that space as well. And um yeah, so I learned a lot from Sarah. She has these elaborate spreadsheets where she does world building ideas, and keeping track of holidays and weather patterns, and everything from like the types of rocks to to different clothing. I mean, it's just incredible how she keeps track of all those world building things. I think for me, the biggest thing I do to create a scene that resonates with people and has that very realistic thread is to make sure that I'm doing my research as the writer. For instance, in Pacifica, a lot of that book takes place on the water. I am not a sailor. I do not have a boat. But in order to write that story, I did take sailing lessons. I interviewed this female captain, and she taught me all sorts of different things because I wanted to be able to feel like I was on a boat when I was reading it. I wanted to be able to say, this is what the rope, or aka the line, it feels like in your hand. This is what the knot does. This is what the knot holds. This is not just using port and starboard right, but actually knowing the way your feet feel on the deck when the boat is moving. All of those details are really integral in creating a scene that a reader will buy. And for me, that all comes down to good research.
I love that. I feel like the authors who we've interviewed, who we ask about setting, they all say that they like go to this place or they do a lot of immersive research, and that definitely helps the reader to feel so completely immersed if the author has been immersed in the world too. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Google can only take you so far, right? Like, I mean, it can show you some pictures and it can tell you some facts, but to really get the feel of something, you have to dive in a little deeper.
Definitely, definitely. I would never write a book on the water because being in a boat, it's a little scary. I feel like I'd mess up, but I'm glad that you put yourself out there and took lessons
It
and
is
stuff.
super scary. And that's why a lot of those scenes are super scary because I'm like, I don't feel in control at all right now.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really hard. Sailing is really hard. And I never, even during the course of these lessons, I mean, these lessons were all from the perspective of me taking notes and gathering information. So I never actually sailed on my own, but just watching it was terrifying because I didn't know how we were not sinking all the time.
That makes sense. I would have the same question. Why are we not thinking?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Moving on to your plot twists at the end of your books, they're absolute perfection. So, how do you craft plot twists that are foreshadowed perfectly while still being unpredictable? Like, I'll be reading, I'm like, how did I miss that? And then I realize, oh, Kristen Simmons is a genius. That's how I missed that.
I wish a lot. I mean, I'll take it. Okay. Thank you. I love plot twists when I read, and I love writing plot twists. Plot twists can very, very rarely for me, a plot twist will be an easy, kind of surprising, fun thing. Often it takes a lot of work. And I forget what the phrase is, something about like if it reads easy, it writes hard. If it writes easy, it reads hard, or something like that. So you need to, like, as the writer, I put a lot of time in and a lot of effort in to make it look seamless for people. So when they read it, they're like, oh, plot twist, right? But for me, it's been hours and hours of where I'm putting something, why I'm putting it there, and how I layer in all of those pieces up front that you really don't pay that much attention to until boom, it hits you. So it's work. It's a workout, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yes.
Plot twists freak me out. Like, I will say, I feel like whenever I get a twist, I'm like, oh, like, okay, like I see where that is going. And the same with like foreshadowing. You go back and reread a book and it's all spelled out. And I feel like you go back and you're like, how could I have missed this?
Yeah.
You know, but it's all right in front of you. But I think a plot twist is certainly something that will make you reread it. So that's something
Yeah.
to be said for sure.
They're hard. They're really hard. And it's a very, very delicate balance of doing something that's surprising that doesn't leave the reader feeling like it came out of left field. That and then you don't buy it because you're like, no, that where did that come from? Or on the opposite side, that they see coming the whole time, right? That's the other side. So when you manage to skate between those two lines, you end up with a plot twist.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So moving towards your writing strategy and how you actually write your books, you co-wrote Set Fire to the Gods with Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
How does co-authoring a book compare to writing a book by yourself?
Yeah, so co-authoring is a really interesting process. The way we did it is we did all our pre-writing together. So we did created our synopsis, created our ideas, created our world. We did all of that together, either in person or on the phone, on Zoom, things like that. And then she and I both had point of view characters. So she's the character of Ember, I'm the character of Maddox. I would write a chapter for Maddox, I would send it to her. She would edit that and then write her next chapter, send it to me. I would edit Ember's chapter, write my next Maddox chapter, send it to her, so on and so forth throughout the entire book. So that's the way we did the first draft to Set Fire and then to Embers. Writing a book solo is obviously different because you don't have somebody to write the other half of it for you. So it's a little more intensive. The other thing that is really fun about co-writing is you have somebody that can share all of that headspace with you. So when you get stuck on something, when you don't know why a scene isn't working, when a character is, not behaving correctly, you can call that other person and they can be like, oh, let's talk through it. They immediately know what you're talking about. When you're writing a book by yourself, if you do talk to someone, which I recommend, because that can kind of loosen up those threads that are tied too tightly, you generally have to explain everything, right? And even then, sometimes it's really hard to get them to the point where they understand exactly what you're trying to do in a scene. So that's a tricky part of writing by yourself. But yeah, generally my process is similar for writing a book by myself. I come up with the idea, do all the pre-writing, lay out a first draft. I'm very linear, so I generally write front to back of a book. I don't write the scenes I like best first, which I'm always jealous of people that can do that. I have to start at the beginning. And then, yeah, I do an edit. I send it to a beta reader who reads it, and then I do an edit based on their feedback. Then my agent gets it. I do an edit based on her feedback. And then we go to editors, and then there are so many more reads and revisions.
I loved getting that window into the writing process. You mentioned pre-writing. What does your pre-writing look like?
So it's actually really different for every book that I've had. I feel like it's like children. You raise children differently depending on what child it is and the different needs that they have. And this is absolutely the same way. Is every story I've had has had its own personality, has wanted to appear in a different way, and wanted me to tell it in a different way. Sometimes the characters come first, sometimes the plot comes first, sometimes I just carry around like the Norse myth of Valhalla. I carry that around for 10 years and don't know how I'm going to tell that story until all of a sudden it hits that it's a boarding school for con artists. Like, it just all comes in different ways. And then part of the thing that I've learned over the process of my career as a writer has been to go with the flow with that. is not to be like, nope, now we write our outline, now we do our synopsis, now is where we do our character work. Like, if I let go of that and just say, okay, well, what do I feel like I need to know right now? What do I feel like I need to do right now? And then go with that next thing, then that is generally a good guide for me going forward. Sometimes I do really extensive outlines. I mean, we're talking like 40, 50 pages. Sometimes I do like a web of ideas where I circle ideas and branch out and circle more. I mean, it just all depends on the book and what I feel like I need before I get going.
That is so cool. I love that. I feel like a lot of people have a very rigid kind of structure, but
Yeah.
it's very cool that your pre-writing can vary.
And that may work for some people too, but for me, it always seems to change. I would love it if it was the same thing, but it's not.
Well, I love it regardless.
Oh,
Also, I love your author's note for your book Pacifica because it made me realize how all of your books have such strong social and political commentary. So, how do you weave that powerful social commentary into your books in a way that leaves your readers regarding the world and its power structures differently?
mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was another, Pacifica was another book, an idea that I carried around for a long time and didn't quite know how to put it out on paper. But yes, the author's note that you're talking about has to do with my great grandmother's role in a Japanese internment camp, and how she survived that experience in her life, and how her children survived that experience, and how the only way I could picture surviving that experience was as a pirate, living on these, trash infested waters. And so that's how my family story turned into the story of Pacifica. Um, and I'm spacing on what your original question was. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. It was a long question. It was, how do you weave such powerful social commentary
Oh,
into
yes,
your
yes,
books?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, that had to do with family, um, and like I was talking about earlier, the whole dynamic of writing the survivor story over and over, right? So that is my heart story that I want to write again and again, is a survivor. Um, Prior to this life as an author, I was a social worker, and I worked for many years as a social worker and a mental health therapist. So I have a licensed clinical social work degree, and could do therapy with various groups of people. Can you hear Percy Jackson? I don't know if
Yes.
you
Hi, Percy.
crashing on my ceiling right now. So yes, so as a social worker, one of the great things that you get to experience is being with a person when they're often at their lowest, as they work to get their feet back under them and regain the different parts of their lives that they have lost. And that, I think, is a big part of where the survivor story comes from. But it's a big part for me about pushing forward that social justice narrative, is giving voice to people who are really struggling, and people who don't have the same voice that other people have naturally been given through privilege. So yes, I feel like that social justice narrative is always pushed forward because of my past, and just because it's something I really believe in. Is if I'm writing a book that people are going to read, I want to make sure that they get that perspective.
That's beautiful. I love that. Your books are very impactful, and I'm really glad that you bring like your past experiences in your work and how you see how the world should be like different, and are like writing books for young readers so they can read about this and then have a different perspective on things and maybe go forth and like change the world just a little bit.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, moving more to the future, your upcoming release, Find Him Where You Left Him Dead, is going to be the start of a yokai horror duology. Can you tell us more about it? It sounds so exciting.
I am so excited for it. I am really, really excited for this one. So this is my first horror. I've never done horror before. because I am very scared of things like horror movies, for instance. I can't watch them. I don't know what I'm doing writing a horror because I'm so scared. But I think that actually tapping into that is actually what made the book so great for me, is because it did scare me. It scared me writing it. It allowed me to think of all the things that I am really terrified of and then to put them down on paper. I'm Japanese, and these were a lot of the folk tales that I heard growing up. Stories about yokai, stories about oni, which are demons, and I don't know. There's just so many Japanese ghost stories that are really horrifying, and kind of smushing those into this world with this wonderful origin folktale of Izanami and Izanagi and the beginning of the world. And I just can't wait to share it with people. It's got this great mythology base to it, which is one of the things I love. But it also is about a game. It's about and I think that will make it relatable to people. 5 kids play a game, 4 of them make it back. 1 is coming back to find you.
I'm literally screaming on the inside. I'm so excited. I hate horror movies. I love horror books, and I'm so excited. I love a game. I love a ghost.
Oh yes, there is definitely a game in this. And I will say, recently the date has been updated, so it comes out September 26th now.
Yes.
Couple weeks earlier.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
That is super exciting, and I love that you have some of the elements of your past novels in this with the mythological storytelling component, which I think is great. I'm not a big horror girl. Lily is. I'm sure we'll hear all about the scariness from Lily. I gotta say, the scariness, I'm impressed that you dove into horror books if you're not a big scary movie person, but I do think that's very impressive that you're able to not scare yourself.
Thank you. Well, I did scare myself. We'll see. Will I regret this decision? I don't know. We'll find out.
So off of that, how does writing horror compare to writing thriller, dystopian, speculative fiction kind of books that you've stuck to in the past?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it's very similar. I think it's still, like all of my books, have that survival story in them. And this one is just a little more out there, right? Like, they have to survive this brutal mythology focused game. And there are all of these terrible demons and ghosts that are a part of it. And so it still has that same survival thread running through it. It's just a matter of the situation around that thread, the situations around that thread that have changed.
Gotcha. And I think that's super exciting that you're able to take your skills of writing a different genre and put it into something that is completely different, but I think the same group of readers will really enjoy. So it's super exciting.
Thank you.
And so looking, further down the line, are there any other projects that you're working on that you can tell us about?
Well, this has kind of been my world for a while. So I am now editing the second book in the series. So it's a 2-book series, and so the last year has been really consumed with writing book 2, and now I'm doing my self edit on it before I send it to my editor for her to dig in.
That is so exciting. I think it's so cool that you've already written the second book. I know that in the book world you do write it before it comes out, but my brain can't understand that. So I'm like, oh my gosh,
so far, so far in advance. I know, it's really weird. But by the time the book comes out, you're always like 3 books. You've written 3 books since then, and you're like, oh yeah, what did he do? Where was he then? What character is she talking? Because we write it so much earlier. But this one will be good because I have been so in this world because I'm writing the sequel. So it'll all be fresh.
Yes, it's like how I said, if you're immersed in the world and you do the research, then it'll be immersive. So I can already tell that this book is going to be so atmospheric.
Oh, good. I also would like to say that this is my favorite cover that I've ever seen on a book.
I'm so excited to see it.
It will
I
come
can't
out
wait.
on February 2nd. I haven't even announced that yet, but February 2nd, is when we are going to put out the cover, and I am losing my mind over this cover. It's so great. I can say that because I did not design it at all, but I think they did an amazing job with it. It is beautiful.
I cannot wait to see it. I'm gonna be up like reloading my Instagram on that day to see if you post it.
Yeah, it is. It's really something.
Well, we cannot wait to read it and to see it. And I think those are all the questions that we have for you today.
Great.
So is there any like social media you want to plug? Any other things you want to plug before we go?
Absolutely. Definitely follow me on Instagram. I'm at Kris10, right? So it's KRIS 10 WRITES. And then my website is KristenSimmonsBooks.com. Had to think about that for a second. but I also have extra information up on my website. Mostly everything I put up update wise gets to Instagram first, I think, these days. So yeah, that's where it is. I love chatting with people on Instagram, so send me a message and tell me about book stuff, and yeah, we'll chat. Or dog stuff. I love chatting about dog stuff.
Yes, I think you should all follow Kristen Simmons on Instagram because Percy is just adorable, and I think you have other dogs and they're cute as well.
I do. We foster dogs, and so we have 3 foster fails. And sometimes we have even more.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to listen to this when it goes live.
Yes.
It was lovely to have you on. Thank you.
Yes, it's so great meeting you guys.
That concludes today's interview with Kristen Simmons. I loved hearing her talk about how she created the cast of characters for her Vale Hall series and how she wanted to write a group of main characters who readers would want to eat birthday cake with. It was also really interesting to hear her talk about how she's always writing a survivor story where the main characters are survivors and they're trying to make it through and fight through certain circumstances, and how that looks different in every one of her books, but it's always a survivor story that she's writing. That was just so enlightening to hear, and I will be looking at her books in a different way now than I did before, and I love that. I am very excited to read Find Him Where You Left Him Dead, and I actually got approved for a digital advanced reader copy of it, so I'm so excited to dive into it and read all about the horror and mythology that the characters are in the midst of. If you would like to follow Kristen Simmons on social media, I will include links to all of her social media in the description below. I will also be including the link to where you can check out her books at the library and also links to where you can buy her books. I will also include the link to where you can pre-order Find Him Where You Left Him Dead so that you can receive it and read it when it comes out on September 26th. Feel free to follow us on Instagram too at keeping.tabs.podcast. Follow us on TikTok at Keeping Tabs Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube, Keeping Tabs Podcast, or write a review or leave a rating of us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and we will see you soon with a new one. Bye!